So, hello everyone, sorry for taking a break, I needed to deal with a few things, but now I'm back, and as you may hear already, I am not using a script this time. So this video may get a little bit longer and more rambly than the last one, but you lose some, you gain some. The timbre of my voice should probably sound much more natural, as much as I can manage without being a native speaker. Write a comment if you like it, if you don't like it, I will appreciate any and all feedback in that matter. So let's get on with the video. Now today I want to talk about an old drama, nerdy drama, that was going on in the background for years, but flared up at least 2 times, around 2 years ago and maybe 1 year ago. So the drama itself concerned the representation and characterization of fictional races in a number of fictional science fiction and fantasy universes and franchises. And the gist of the problem was that one side was saying that presenting orcs, elves, hobgoblins, kobolds, whatever you want, as inherently evil or inherently smart or genetically evil, that these characterizations of this inherent characteristics is problematic because it calls to mind real-life racist ideologies and racist science, and as such, presenting those things in this way in mainstream nerdy culture was in some way promulgating those kinds of ideas and those kinds of frameworks among the fans of these kinds of pastimes. And the opposition was essentially saying that this is grasping at straws, that there is a very big difference between fiction and real life, and that people who are looking at minorities in the real world and they associate those minorities with representation of orcs or representation of fictional evil races are the real racists in the room, as no one who is well-adjusted would think in such a way. Now there were many other arguments across different videos, because essentially what happened, and if you know anything about internet Anglo dramas, then they usually play out in a way in which a lot of people are talking past each other and, getting really angry and really worked up, and often in effect not really saying much at all. Which is a shame, because this topic is incredibly interesting and I will not really be taking sides. I'm not interested in that because neither of the sides really gave me a comprehensive take on this topic. And I will try to do my best here to give you a more comprehensive take than what you may have heard elsewhere. I will not be able to cover everything because, as you will soon see, there is a lot to dig out of this topic, of this little question. And the question itself would be, is it problematic, immoral, wrong to present orcs as evil in fantasy, inherently evil? And just this little question can be approached from at least 4 angles. And the first angle would be to consider orcs evil, quote unquote, simply because they are the bad guys or the antagonists in stories, games, and other media. Now, everyone knows that bad guys are not necessarily evil in any way, that there is much more to being evil than just being an antagonist and opposing force. So we have a second level of moral evil, and these are immoral acts, despicable behaviors, words, actions, thoughts, whatever, that usually the bad guys will commit in a story or in a setting to justify them being the antagonists of the protagonist. And there is a third level, and in the third level we have a religious evil, and this is where the cosmic force argument came about, the metaphysical religious notion of evil. And this is where the fantasy element comes to the fore the most, because in many franchises you will have, for example, a spell that can detect evil, or spells that can deal more damage to evil creatures. So if you have something like this, then you need some kind of an objective, magical, religious, or just supernatural notion of good and evil in your world. And there's also a fourth level, which is this meta level, in which you can say that it is immoral for you as a player or as a game designer or writer to use the third level of cosmic inherent evil to present certain races in your game as evil just because now you are reinforcing racist notions or racist culture. Now in this video I will focus on the first one and parts of the second one. This is because not only they are the easiest to tackle, also with the first one you will see that there is a quirk in logic here that will throw a wrench into our discussion later if we don't deal with it now. So let's get on to the video proper.
You end my torment. Set me free from the slavery of existence.
Now basically, a story is just an account of events. And every story will have a protagonist and an antagonist. And these are really story narratology basics, but it's important to just lay it out clearly that a protagonist can be a human, can be a dog, can be an object, whatever, and the antagonist can also be another person, a force of nature, or like a literal nature, like in Revenant, where it was the weather and the landscape itself that was the antagonistic force that was keeping the protagonist from achieving her goals in the movie. Now, this is important to state it like this, because, for example, in the Revenant, you will see that just by the virtue of being an antagonist, the weather was presented as a threatening force, as an isolating force, as something maybe hauntingly beautiful, but not really relaxing, not really cozy, not inviting in any way. And you can see how even such a neutral force as nature can be made evil looking, like antagonistic and threatening, by needing to be presented as an antagonistic force. And this comes into play where we have antagonists as people or as persons, because again, the protagonist and antagonist in your story do not have to be human, they just need to be personified. And this is a very specific distinction that we will carry through all videos, essentially, because if we are talking about fantastical races and fantastical worlds, obviously we will often not be dealing with humans per se, but we will be dealing with people or persons, creatures that we personify, that we allow to consider as persons with agency, not objects. And this is important from a story point of view, even if you don't agree from moral point of view or whatever, because people care about events not in an abstract, but through identifying with some kind of an agent that is experiencing those events. And this is the point of a story in the end, to just make you care about the events. The story is not really conveying you any knowledge of good and evil by itself. The story will reflect evil and good at you, because the author of a story needs to understand what things are considered to be bad and which things are considered to be good, to make sure that you root for the protagonist and root for the downfall of the antagonist. And you can see that in older stories, right? Where older story may be written for an audience that is no longer there, about a reality that is no longer there. And you reading some very old story may see that you don't identify with the protagonist, and you don't identify with their goals, their aspirations, and their behaviors, and as such, you find it hard to really be moved by the events of the story. And of course, you can say that there are geniuses and great artists, great writers, filmmakers, video game designers, whatever, who will imbue their work with some kind of a deep moral ideology or thoughts and feelings, but this is not the baseline of a good story. A good story needs to just make you care, and to make you care, it needs to use moral standards that are not coming from the story proper, but from somewhere else, like from the audience, from the writer, or from religion, whatever. Now, this may seem obvious when we spell it out like this, but it is not intuitive. And this is because most stories will present themselves as a specific series of events that are either negative or positive, and they will try to imbue this negativity or positivity with some kind of objective moral value. So for example, in a horror movie, you will start out in a good place as a protagonist, and you will end up in a much worse place. And this kind, even if you survive, of course, you will be physically, mentally, emotionally degraded by the end of the movie. And this is why it's a horror movie and not a coming-of-age story or from rags to riches story. And this kind of a chart of your well-being as a protagonist can be presented graphically in forms of charts, basically of graphs that are charting the narrative in some way. But again, this is not really a statement of morality. And I will let the man himself, Kurt Vonnegut, who is probably the most famous theoretician of narrative, who tended to present certain narratives in form of graphs. And I will let him speak now about how he sees the good things, the good events in the narrative and bad events in the narrative.
I would just prove to you that Shakespeare was as poor a storyteller as any Arapaho But I haven't. I have, in fact, told you why this is respected as a masterpiece. We are so seldom told the truth. And in Hamlet, Shakespeare tells us. We don't know enough about life to know what the good news is and the bad news is, and we respond to that. Thank you, Bill. Now, if you think, well, all we do is we pretend to know what the good news is and what the bad news is, and you think about our training in this matter, all we do is echo the feelings of people around us. So, although I don't believe in heaven, I would like to go up to such a place once just to ask somebody in charge, hey, what was the good news and what was the bad news? Because we can't be sure.
And you can say, okay, cool, this is obvious, like stories are not philosophical treatises, they are not ethical codes, we don't get our morality from stories. But, well, I don't exactly agree. I'm not saying that these are the only ways of understanding the world, but stories and narratives are one of the most powerful vehicles for conveying meaning to other people and to ourselves. And we will often tell each other stories about ourselves and other people and historical events to ascertain why something is right, why something is wrong, why someone did this thing, why someone reacted in that way, etc. And through that narrative lens, we will understand why certain things happened as they did and who was right, who was incorrect in any given situation. And the problem with thinking in this way is that if you introduce the notion of evil to your narratives, then you encounter big problems. And these problems are best explained, I think, by certain breed of modern thinkers who, for many reasons, are not really prone to assuming any sort of a rigid ethical system. So they start with a very similar notion of morality as stories, of relativistic morality, that morality that kind of depends on your point of view. And I will now show you 4 quotes from certain philosophers and psychologists. I will read the last one, but I will paraphrase the first 3. So if you are listening to it on YouTube, you don't have to pause. You can just check it out later. So the first 3 quotes are basically saying that labeling a person as evil is a way to stop your inquiry into their behavior. And because evil mostly demands opposition and not understanding. So you oppose evil, you don't understand evil, and also evil does not help you understand why someone is doing what they are doing. So you end up in a situation when you don't think about why something is evil. Of course, you need to be told that something is evil, or you just quickly establish the evilness of an act on a person and then you stop thinking. Of course, not always. This is just, one of the way that you can use this notion, but it is fairly common. And I will now read the last quote, which I think gives the most comprehensive take. And this is Eva Gerard. People often feel that calling another person evil is immoral. It's tantamount to putting her beyond the pale of normal human existence, in all its flawed, but still remediable and redeemable fallibility. Those who have this worry about immortality think that to judge someone as evil is to assert that she is beyond forgiveness and redemption, and it's also to imply that she is entirely unlike us, the judgers. When people make judgments of evil, they think there is a moral abyss between themselves, who at worst do wrong, and the others, the evildoers. Now, why this matters, and is it really true? And we can test it out in quotes, fairly easily by just asking ourselves how much do we know about the motivations and context of certain decisions and actions of people who are considered evil in our culture? And the more trendy example of that would be serial killers. If you remember the movies like Seven, serial killers in the past, in the mainstream media at least, were represented as some kind of a satanic, larger-than-life geniuses who are conveying some convoluted messages to the investigators, and they are turning their crime scenes into this occult spectacle of debauchery and gore for us to gawk at, and they are outsmarting everyone, they are hiding in plain sight, and obviously they will also have at least 4 or 5 tropes connected to real-life serial killers mixed up in one person. And as the common understanding of serial killers became better, maybe thanks to all those YouTube videos about unsolved murders that we watch at 3 a.m., they became more of a pathetic figures, still threatening, still predators, but not really these geniuses and those larger-than-life devils, and more just people with history of abuse that are taking out their fetishes and their traumas on innocent victims. An even more spicy example would be people like Adolf Hitler, who himself is used as a central figure for a thought experiment in which you are asked whether or not you would kill baby Hitler if you had a chance, knowing that in a few decades this baby, as a man, would invade Poland and start World War II. The problem with this thought experiment is that it assumes that Hitler was some kind of a special person, uniquely evil person, and if not for him, the German state would not embark on the series of conquests that it did in the late 1930s and 1940s. And this view of Hitler as this special individual stems from the fact that most people have little to no explanations as to why World War II, the most pivotal conflict of recent memory, happened at all. We have shallow excuses or very shallow reasons, like the Germans wanted revenge for the First World War, or that Hitler was mad, or that they wanted glory, or they wanted to secure their power, or to get the Lebensraum for the German nation. But these explanations are very, very weak, and you don't have to be a history buff to understand that. You just need to ask yourself, how many alternative views do you know about this conflict? Were there any good reasons for Germans to act as they did? And by good, I don't mean morally good, but just sensible reasons for why they embarked on this kind of diplomatic course that they took. And there are many good explanations for why they did what they did, and these explanations have a side effect of making Hitler less special, because any other head of German state would have to face similar challenges as he did. But now we then take away the special evil status that we give to Hitler, and we need to understand why reality happened as it happened. Right now, some of you may be listening to me with suspicion. Am I a secret sympathizer with the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany? Because I'm giving unqualified explanations that may make Hitler less of an evil person in your eyes. And this is specifically the problem, which is that we are not really allowed to make explanations for evil people. And this, of course, can go both ways, right? So a certain person may encounter a few of those good arguments for the German position before the Second World War, and they may flip into outright support for the Third Reich, because they assume that evil cannot have good reasons to behave as it does, and because these are good reasons, the Third Reich could not have been an evil force. And this schizophrenic approach stems directly from what we just discussed, which is the notion of evil as an irredeemable, unreasonable force. And I mention unreasonable because this is just a new iteration that you may have noticed here and there, that people will not really say that someone is evil per se, but they will say that they are unreasonable, that they are crazy. And this is just a new version of that stems clearly from Western European history, in which we assume that the good guys are reasonable because reason is good and evil is unreasonable, and because we are reasonable, we are good, and because we are good, we are reasonable, and everyone who opposes us is crazy. We don't really have to ask ourselves why they do what they do, or even consider that they may be right in at least some respect. They are just crazy, and they need to be defeated because they are crazy. Okay, cool. whatever, man. But we were starting with orcs and we are now with Hitler. So where is this video going? And it is going in the direction of war, and specifically Warcraft and World of Warcraft, because this franchise starts with war and has the war in the name, and has also the most clear example of an evil retcon that I've ever seen. And the Warcraft series starts off with an interplanetary invasion of an orcish horde that comes through a portal to another dimension and attacks the peaceful kingdom of humans, and then of course attacks the rest of the world. In the first two games that are real-time strategy games from the mid to late 90s, the orcs are presented as this satanic, cannibalistic, demonic horde that summons undead and demons and is overall just bad. And the height of a plot between those characters is that they betray one another for power, of course. Now, between those two games and World of Warcraft, which is the last iteration of the franchise, the orcs have turned from this satanic, primitive horde of cannibals and murderers into kinda basically harsh people living in harsh land with Native American vibes. Not as much as the Tauren, but still, there is there. So they became those sagely shamans and fathers and friends and all that. So what happened? What happened between those two games? And we can give explanations that are concerning the setting of the game, but what is more important here is to why this setting changed, because someone changed this setting between those two games. The explanation, of course, in the setting is that they stopped drinking demon blood, and that's why they became good again, or at least neutral again. And the thing is that I have never really seen an interview about specifically this topic, but what I assume happened is that someone wanted to write a more developed story with orcish characters. And as we said previously, the story has to make you care about your main characters. And as we also said before, evil makes you unreasonable, makes you inhuman, makes you crazy. So you can't really have a story about friendship, loyalty, perseverance, bravery, whatever else you may want to have, and also have your character to be evil, as in evil, evil, evil. Something has to give. Either the story has to give, and it will be a shallow, weird, comedic story with, just an evil character at the fore, and not really that much of an emotional baggage here, or it will cost your character their evilness. They will become much more human, because we need to make them relatable in some way. And World of Warcraft and Warcraft franchise generally is just the best fantasy case for that, because these are very known games and you can see this clear transformation from one to the other. But these kinds of things also happen on smaller scale in different franchises, like Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor humanizes orcs in Mordor, which is, of course, Lord of the Rings universe, much more than Tolkien ever did. They are talking with one another, they are talking to you, they have little personalities that you can explore, because the game focuses on recruiting orcs to your army, so they need to have some kind of a character, and this character costs them their evilness. So, should we care? They just changed something in their universe to make a better story, so where's the problem? I personally have no problem with that, all the power to them. But the thing is, if you have a universe in addition to a story, then the rules of the game change somewhat. And they change because most stories don't have universes, they have settings at best. Every story needs some kind of a setting to give it context. But a universe, or maybe a Conworld, which is a term that was invented by Tolkien himself, is a separate beast. A Conworld has its own rules and has separate logic, and it operates independently of the stories that are set in this Conworld. So the statements made about this Conworld or this universe are more akin to objective statements and less, subjective story perspectives. So in a story you can say, of course, the protagonist hates orcs, so he will present from his point of view all orcs as evil, and they will do evil things, blah 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 blah, because he hates them. But if you have a Conworld, and in a Conworld you say orcs are evil, then you need to justify their evilness by some objective standard. And, spoiler alert, Tolkien does that, and he is in the clear, but many settings don't, or many universes don't. And this also creates an unreasonable expectation from point of view of certain people who are arguing in this drama that I mentioned in the beginning. For example, Extra Credits said this.
And a good example of a series getting better and better at this over time is Mass Effect. Because in the first game, Commander Shepard never meets a nice Batarian or a fun Geth. But then, spoiler alert, most of these evil species turn out to be as complex and interesting as the human ones as the trilogy progresses. Broad moral generalizations about species or culture not only doesn't make internal sense, but it also leads to less evocative, less rewarding worlds and games. But we can solve that problem by following our best creative instincts to diversify, deepen, and complicate the worlds we create and its denizens.
And you can see that you could reduce their argument to absurdity and say that, from their perspective, to show a race of people as enemies, you need not only to give narrative context for their behavior, but craft this entire egalitarian fantastic setting. And their example of doing that in the correct way is this giant trilogy of gigantic games. So you could say, well, if you make a tower defense game and you place orcs as models for your enemies, then you have created a racist game, right? Because you have created a game in which the orcs are just mindless enemies. And obviously this is absurd, and I think Extra Credits would not really advocate this position at all. But this is where you lead yourself if you confuse stories and narratives, or even just aesthetics, because many games have no story to speak of, with universes and with big franchises. These two things are very different. So I hope I have explained this whole problem with narratives in this video, which is that narratives by themselves don't justify evilness or goodness in any way. They use outside sources of morality and perceptions of morality to amplify their emotional effect, but they also have the ability to retard your critical thinking skills about evilness and goodness by hijacking with this notion of evil your empathy, basically, and your ability to understand the motivations of the other side. Now, in the second video, I will talk about objective standards of morality that are required to make a race evil in the universe. Objectively evil, because you can do it, as Tolkien did it, and other people did it. But, spoiler alert again, it turns into a clusterfuck really fast, and we will discuss that in this next video. And for now, cheers.
Bright Lord, Dark Lord, same thing really. End result's me ripping spines out, which I like to do anyway, so either way's a win.
A fine addition to our